Dido Elizabeth Belle was born into tragedy. In 1761, the little girl came into the world in the British West Indies as the daughter of an enslaved black woman named Maria Belle. Dido's daddy was actually the 24-year-old high-ranking British officer, Sir John Lindsay, who first laid eyes on Maria when his forces captured a Spanish slave ship. Though we have little record of Maria's consent, it was lust at first sight for John Lindsay. He likely took her as a concubine, as one does when they're an 18th-century white male. Around 1765, when Dido was a 5-year-old toddling girl, Sir John Lindsay took his daughter back home with him over to London, England. Dido's father did not want family life to tie him down, and instead of starting a little English love nest with his girl Maria, he basically abandoned them. He dumped Dido off with his powerful uncle, the Judge William Murray, and continued on with his illustrious Navy career around the globe. Although we don't know the Murray family's immediate reaction to the news of their new war Dido, it probably wasn't enthusiastic. As the Lord Chief Justice, William Murray was famous as a brilliant politician and reformist. But that didn't mean that he was ready to take on the education of a foreign girl. And there was one other huge problem. Dido also had to contend with her love child status in England. Although noblemen would sometimes support their illegitimate children in the 18th century, these children were not usually mixed-race daughters of the West Indies. Dido presented a huge scandal for polite society, so the Murrays came up with a so-called ingenious plan. In the end, the Murrays settled for a surprising approach when it came to Dido. They took her in as a ward and began to teach her the standard accomplishments for a lady of the time, including reading, writing, and playing music. They also gave her companionship in the form of Dido's cousin, Elizabeth Murray, who also lived at their house. Then they upped it a notch. In some ways, the Murrays completely doted on Dido Belle, paying for expensive medical treatments when she needed it, and even decorating her bedroom in the finest styles. She also dressed herself in some of the latest fashions and could indulge in other vanities while she lived with them. But there was a darker side to her life. For all her fine accomplishments, the color of Dido's skin prevented her from receiving the same treatment as her cousin Elizabeth, and the family never quite accepted her on her own terms. The family treated her just fine and private, but when important company came calling, the Murrays shunted her to the side. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Whenever the Murrays had elaborate dinner parties, evidence suggests that they barred Dido from even sitting down with everyone and enjoying the meal. One guest at the house recalled Dido entering only after the dinner had finished to take coffee with the group and talk with the women of the house. As it happens, though, her relationship to these women was even more tense. Because of her uncertain in-between position in the house, the Murrays likely treated Belle less like an equal relation and more like a lady's maid or a lady's companion for her cousin Elizabeth. In fact, some have suggested that they only took her on in the first place so she could act as a playmate for the more traditional lady. One other sore spot between Elizabeth and Dido: Elizabeth was much richer, with a healthy inheritance that made her a very eligible bachelorette. Dido Belle, meanwhile, was in a much different position. She was an illegitimate child of color, yet she nonetheless had some money and good breeding. This made it extremely difficult to find a husband, though as we'll see, Dido managed it in the end. To go along with her difficulty finding a paramour, Dido Belle had a real-life Cinderella story. For example, she often had to tend to the dairy and poultry yards at Kenwood House, though her uncle did pay her a tidy sum to take care of the chickens. Still, Dido must have known she was better than this, and she set out to prove it. If the first thing strangers noticed was the color of Dido's skin, the second thing was always her wit. One man described her as pert, though in full disclosure, he also called her neither handsome nor genteel. Despite the fact that tastes of the time leaned towards white, pale skin, Dido's exotic looks made her a beauty that stood out from the crowd. Today, Dido Belle's claimed fame is in a notorious painting. In 1779, the Murray family commissioned a portrait of Elizabeth alongside Dido, and the resulting painting depicts the mixed-raced Belle right alongside the white Elizabeth and almost on equal footing with her. To say this was scandalous would be an understatement, and one detail proves it. Although Dido holds a plate of fruit in the portrait, perhaps suggesting she is on her way to serve someone, Elizabeth's hand is on her arm like a companion, and both women are dressed in equally lavish clothing that shows they are both of noble high birth. In fact, Dido's garb is even more fashionable than Elizabeth's more staid clothing. With her charming demeanor and intelligence to match, Dido started to seriously catch the attention of her uncle William Murray, who began to depend on her for dictations and other administrative duties for even his most important cases in court. In this, Belle was yet again a rule-breaker. Usually this position would have gone to a man, but the good times wouldn't last. Although the Murrays didn't exactly treat Dido Belle with full respect, their peers considered them scandalously progressive and even dangerous. As a judge, William Murray got extra scrutiny, and many people saw his obvious softness for his mixed-race ward as an indication that he wasn't able to be objective about abolition issues. They even called his bias criminal. As we'll see, this would have big consequences. In 1772, Dido's uncle William Murray presided over the infamous Somerset versus Stuart case, where the owner of an escaped slave wanted to send his victim back into slavery. However, English common law had never formally legalized slavery. The judge ruled in favor of the freedmen, saying that slavery was so odious that nothing can be suffered to support it. But that wasn't all. As it turned out, the Somerset versus Stuart case was the beginning of a new world order in England. Although it did not completely abolish slavery in England, and Murray himself said he only wanted his ruling to apply for this specific case, it did set a precedent that put a fire under abolitionists and became the rallying cry. And Dido may have been at the center of this change. At the time, many argued that Murray's ruling had everything to do with his ward, Dido Elizabeth Belle, and that his bias towards the freedmen was because of his bias towards his great-niece. As one critic sneered about the case, he will be set free, for Lord Mansfield keeps a block in his house, which governs him and the whole family. Yet if you think Dido should have been proud of her uncle, just you wait. In 1788, tragedy struck Dido Belle. That year, her father John Lindsay perished at the relatively young age of 51. While Lindsay hadn't exactly been in his daughter's life for a good long while, perhaps fathering other illegitimate children, it was yet another severing from her past. And then his last will and testament came out. Although Sir John Lindsay didn't have any bona fide heirs, he did leave $1,000 for his children to share amongst themselves. The catch? The name Dido wasn't in his will. Instead, he left it to two children named John and Elizabeth. On the surface, it looked like Lindsay completely forgot about Dido, but the story may be more complex. According to historian Jean Adams, the name Elizabeth might really refer to Dido, and might have actually been her real name, with her uncle changing it to Dido when the girl came to England. On the other hand, maybe not. Another historian claims another of Lindsay's daughters was named Elizabeth, and the money went to her. Ouch! Just a few years after her biological father's passing, Belle then had to deal with the death of her real father figure, William Murray. She had spent nearly all her life in his care, and had learned from him as well as worked for him. So when Murray breathed his last in 1793, it must have devastated Belle. Yet once more, the contents of his will tell a darker story. Because William Murray was such a prominent man, his last testament was actually published for all to see in the Gentleman's Quarterly of 1793. Because of this, the article displayed Dido's dirty laundry for all to see, including the fact that while Murray left her cousin Elizabeth £10,000, he left poor Dido £500. Oh, but that's not all. Anyone who looked at the pages of Gentleman's Quarterly that year might have noticed something strange. In his will, the great Judge William Murray does his precious Dido Belle a supposed sullied by releasing her from slavery. At first glance, that seems generous, but the implications are chilling. You see, if William Murray was conferring freedom upon Dido Belle in his will, that means that technically she had been a slave the entire time she was a member of his family, and he only waited until he died to release her. This puts an entirely new, very creepy spin on Dido's time with him. Of course, some historians have a much different interpretation. According to Paula Byrne, this last will and testament is actually a heartbreaking gesture. Far from proving that William Murray was a heartless jerk who didn't care about Dido's well-being, Byrne argues that Murray's will only made doubly sure that after he was gone, people would treat his niece like the freedwoman she already was. But if that's true, that's not quite what ended up happening. If people expected Dido Belle to fade into obscurity after her important Uncle Murray passed, our girl definitely didn't get the memo. Belle had spent most of her life in Kenwood House and away from company, so it's no surprise that one of her first actions after her relative passed was to jump into the arms of another man. Belle's new lover was a dashing Frenchman by the name of Jean-Louis Charles d'Avenir, who later anglicized his name to John d'Avenir. Although the circumstances of their meeting are mysterious, they likely locked eyes while d'Avenir was working as a steward for one of the families the Murrays were connected to. And once that happened, love came on hot and fast. Less than a year after the passing of her Uncle William, Belle made it official with her new man, tying the knot with d'Avenir on December 5, 1793, in an idyllic ceremony in their local parish at St. George's, Hanover Square. It was hardly the fate a young girl from the West Indies would have imagined having, and it was beautiful, at least while it lasted. In the beginning, d'Avenir and Belle looked like they were in for a long life of matrimonial happiness and domestic bliss. Over the next 10 years, Belle and her husband produced a big brood together, having at least 3 children, all sons, including a pair of twins, who Belle gave birth to shortly after her wedding. But before long, tragedy came for her. In the summer of 1804, Belle succumbed to an unknown illness and passed, leaving her husband to take care of their young children. Sadly, we still have almost no clues about what her final moments looked like and what fatality took her. She was only 43 years old, which was still relatively young for the time. Today, it is difficult for us to commemorate Dido Elizabeth Belle in person because we can't even be sure where her grave is. Commonwealth says that one day developers moved Dido Elizabeth Belle's grave entirely, but other evidence suggests she might still be under St. George's Fields, which is now home to modern housing developments. Dido Belle's story still captivates people to this day, and there have been a handful of fictional forays into her life, including the 2013 film Belle, which stars Gugu Mbatha-Raw as Dido in a lavish somatic story. Aside from that, however, Dido has also received artistic treatments in musicals and novels alike. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factini, for more incredible facts about everything.